Today, we're going over the deadliest disasters that erased entire ancient worlds off the map. Number 1. The Campanian Ignimbrite Eruption. It's about 39,000 years ago, and Europe belongs to the Neanderthals. And these guys have earned it. Stocky and tough and built for the cold, running the continent for a couple 100,000 years while the first modern humans are only just wandering in from the east. Then the Bay of Naples decides it's had enough, and the ground rips open. This is the Campanian Ignimbrite Eruption, comfortably the biggest thing Europe has blown up in 200,000 years. The ash column goes about 44 kilometers straight up, which is roughly 8,000 giraffes stacked head to hoof, in case that helps. Then it gets worse. Superheated gas and rock come screaming down off the vent, clear 1,000-meter ridges like speed bumps, and pour across open water to torch the far shore. And the ash keeps going, a gray blanket settling over 3 million square kilometers, from the eastern Mediterranean out to the plains of Russia. You can still dig it up today. A pale stripe in the dirt at Neanderthal camps as far off as Mezmatskaya Cave in the Caucasus. The crater it all came out of is the Campi Flegrei, the burning fields. And it never went anywhere. It's still there, still steaming, right next to Naples, with hundreds of thousands of people living right inside it, going about their Tuesday like that's a normal place to build a metro. Last time it cleared its throat was 1538. Now, did it kill off the Neanderthals? Truth is, nobody's sure. Some think the volcanic winter it dropped, cooling parts of Europe by 6 to 9 degrees for years, is what finally shoved a struggling species over the edge. Others say they were already fading long before the mountain blew. So the argument still swings back and forth. But nobody argues about the ash itself. At camp after camp, it's the last thing sitting on top of the Neanderthal tools. You dig up through it, and the tool makers are just gone. Number 2. The Bronze Age Collapse. It's around 1200 BCE, and the whole eastern Mediterranean is humming along like one big machine where every part is bolted to every other part. The Hittites run Anatolia from Hattusa. The Mycenaean Greece runs its palaces on stored grain and gold. Ugarit, on the Syrian coast, is fat with trade. Harbor stuffed with ships, and Egypt's pharaohs are shuffling tin and copper and ivory with all of them. Kings write each other letters. Bronze moves by the boatload. It's basically the ancient world's global supply chain, and every kingdom depends on every other one. Then, in maybe 2 generations, the whole thing burns to the ground. Mycenae, Pylos, Ugarit, Hattusa, one after another, gutted, torched, abandoned for good. Dig into any of these cities, and you hit the same thing every time. A thick black layer of ash and collapsed walls and arrowheads, plus clay tablets baked rock hard by the fire that killed the place. And nobody can pin it on one cause. The Egyptians carved warnings about raiders called the Sea Peoples burning the coast. An earthquake storm knocked walls flat across the region. A decades-long drought, written into the tree rings, dried the fields and starved the cities from within. Best guess is all of it landed at once, and a world where everyone leaned on everyone had zero slack to absorb the hit. The collapse was so complete that in Greece, writing itself switched off. Gone for something like 400 years, until people had to invent it all over again. A whole civilization forgot how to read. There's no death toll to put beside that, because the people who kept the records died with everyone else. And if you want the whole collapse in one object, it's a single clay tablet dug out of Ugarit. It's from the city's last king, a man named Amurapi, and his final message is still sitting right there on it. Enemy ships have landed. His towns are on fire. His army is off fighting in Hittite country. His fleet is stranded to the west, and there's nobody left to defend the walls. He got the message out. His final letter only survives because the fire that burned Ugarit baked the clay hard enough to last. A plea for help, preserved by the very disaster it describes. The city itself was never rebuilt. Number 3. The Zanclean Flood. It's about 5 1/3 million years ago, way before anyone's around to see it. And the Mediterranean is bone dry, as in gone. As in, you could walk from Spain to Africa. For hundreds of thousands of years, the sea's been cut off from the Atlantic, and the sun has slowly cooked the whole thing down into a vast basin of blinding white salt flats. In the lowest spots, the cracked, dead ground sits kilometers below the ocean waiting just outside. A canyon of salt, miles deep, where a whole sea used to be. And the only reason we know this happened is because the proof is sitting right under the modern seabed. Drill down through the floor of today's Mediterranean, and you punch through salt kilometers thick, the dried out guts of an evaporated sea, and gouge clean through the Strait of Gibraltar. There's a channel about 200 kilometers long, carved by something enormous forcing its way through. In 2009, a team led by Daniel Garcia Castellanos worked out what that something was. The Atlantic broke through. Once the water found a single weak spot in the rock, it tore that gap wider and wider, faster and faster, and the entire ocean came pouring into the empty basin in what's, as far as we can tell, the biggest flood in the planet's history. Most of the whole Mediterranean, an entire sea, refilled in somewhere between a few months and 2 years, with water blasting through that gap at something like 1,000 times the flow of the Amazon. At the peak, the sea was rising by as much as 10 meters a day. 10 meters. Every day. A wall of Atlantic water came thundering down through the strait, and the white salt desert that had baked there for hundreds of thousands of years just quietly vanished under the ocean coming home. And nobody was there to see it. Not a soul. The most violent single thing water has ever done on this planet, and it played out in an empty room. Number 4. The Missoula Floods. It's about 15,000 years ago, and the last ice age is finally loosening its grip on the Pacific Northwest. A finger of the giant Cordilleran ice sheet, a wall of solid ice a kilometer thick, has crept down out of Canada and corked a river valley in what's now Montana. And behind that plug, the meltwater backs up into a full-blown inland sea. This is Glacial Lake Missoula, holding around 2,000 cubic kilometers of water. That's more than Lake Erie and Lake Ontario put together, stacked behind a dam made of nothing but ice. Now, for decades, one lonely geologist tried to tell everybody what happened out here, and they laughed him clean out of the room. Back in the 1920s, a man named J. Harlan Bretz looked at the shredded landscape of eastern Washington and said the only thing that could have done this was floods, on a scale nobody would believe. The establishment basically patted him on the head and told him to sit down. It took 40 years for the evidence to prove him completely right. And look, in fairness to them, the evidence does sound made up. Giant ripple marks up to 50 feet tall, house-sized boulders sitting in open wheat country, hundreds of miles from any mountain they could have come from, whole canyons scraped down to bare bedrock. Because what happened is the ice dam floated up off its base and let go all at once, and the entire lake drained out in a matter of days. A churning wall of water and house-sized icebergs came ripping across the land at something like 10 times the combined flow of every river on Earth. In the deep canyons, it ran high enough to sink the Statue of Liberty, with room to spare over the torch. It stripped the topsoil to rock and cut brand new canyons in a single afternoon. Then the glacier crept back, the dam sealed shut, the lake filled again, and the whole apocalypse ran on repeat, more than 40 times over roughly 2,000 years. These floods flung boulders hundreds of miles and left ripple marks so enormous that people standing right on top of them had no idea what they were looking at, until the first airplanes flew over and saw the giant frozen waves in the dirt. Bretz was right the whole time. Everybody just needed a plane. Number 5. The 536 Volcanic Winter. It's 536 AD, and one ordinary morning, the sun just comes up wrong. There's a dry, dim, colorless haze smeared across the whole sky, and it does not burn off. Not that morning, not that week, not that month. For the next 18 months, from Europe to the Middle East to China, the sun just hangs there, weak and pale and useless, throwing down light, but almost no heat, while the crops underneath it quietly give up and stop growing. And you can still feel the raw panic in the records. The Byzantine writer Procopius wrote that the sun shone that whole year like the moon, dim and drained, as if something had gone deeply wrong with it. And the ground kept the receipt too. Tree rings across the northern hemisphere show almost no growth in the years right after 536. And ice cores drilled out of Greenland and Antarctica hold a thick spike of volcanic sulfur, the fingerprint of an enormous eruption that wrapped the whole planet in a veil of dust. That dust dragged the global temperature down and pinned it there, the coldest stretch the world had felt in 2,000 years. Harvests failed from Ireland to China. Famine crawled through the towns. And then, in 541, with everybody already on their knees, the plague showed up. This is the plague of Justinian, and the old estimates put it at 25 to 50 million dead, maybe a third of the Eastern Roman Empire, though newer research argues those numbers got wildly inflated over the centuries. Either way, at the peak, Constantinople was burying something like 5,000 people a day, every day. There's a good reason 536 keeps getting called the worst year in history to be alive. But the detail that sticks with me came from the people stuck living under it. A Roman senator named Cassiodorus wrote that the sun had turned a strange, sickly bluish color, that its heat had gone soft and feeble, and that at high noon, the full middle of the day, a person could walk into the open and cast no shadow at all. Number 6. Helike. It's 373 BC, a quiet winter night on the Gulf of Corinth, and the Greek city of Helike is fast asleep. And Helike, you should understand, is a big deal. It runs the entire Achaean League, a block of 12 cities, and is one of the most important places in the Greek world to worship Poseidon, which is worth holding on to, because Poseidon is the god of the sea. He's also, same job description, the god of earthquakes. So keep that in the back of your mind, because tonight, both halves of Poseidon's job are going to turn up on his own front doorstep at the exact same moment. Late that night, the ground gives one violent heave, and the entire coastal plain the city stands on just drops. And then the sea comes rolling in over the top of it. A wall of dark water peels off the gulf and pours across the sinking land, dragging houses and temples and sleeping people out into the black. And by the time the sun comes back up, Helike is gone. Where it stood the night before, there's nothing now but flat, open water. The city and every person in it are under the gulf, along with 10 Spartan warships anchored in the harbor. A rescue party of 2,000 men rowed out over the spot the next day to bring back the bodies. They could not find a single one. But the city never completely vanished. For centuries afterward, the drowned ruins sat just under the surface, close enough to lean over a boat and see them. And about 150 years later, the geographer Eratosthenes wrote that sailors crossing the spot could still look down and see a bronze statue of Poseidon, standing upright on the seabed, one hand on his little bronze seahorse, waiting down there in the green light to snag the nets of any fisherman careless enough to drift over the top of him. Now, the whole story comes down to us through 3 ancient writers, Strabo, Pausanias, and Diodorus. And for the longest time, it read like just another myth. People hunted up and down that coastline for the lost city for generations, and came back with nothing. Until divers and archaeologists finally tracked the ruins down in 2001, buried in the silt of a delta the city used to sit right beside. 6 times the planet wiped the slate clean. A super eruption that maybe ended the Neanderthals. A Bronze Age gone in a generation. A Dead Sea refilled in 2 years. Washington scrubbed to bedrock. The sun dark 18 months. A city swallowed in a night. We keep assuming we're the main characters. The planets never agreed.